Hello there, and welcome to part 2 of A Black and White Tale. Yesterday we learned that Brian the Badger was getting quite bored with the digging that badgers normally do and wanted to find something else. So today we have chapter 3, in which Brian ponders something else. All through that night's dig, Brian couldn't get the thought of something else out of his head. While his father and Roger and the other badgers dug and chatted, Brian did his bit in silence. All the older badgers talked about was digging. They weren't really talking to each other, just saying things like, "Nice claw work, Rog," or "Come on, Earthy, get stuck in," and they seemed happy with that. Brian was bored with it. He'd heard it all before, all the same remarks and jokes. It wasn't like it was when he was with Squish and the others. Colin thought one hole was pretty much like another. And Whitetip wouldn't go near an acorn that had too much soil on it. Once the night's dig had finished and Brian had cleaned himself up and rested, he went off to find his friends. He found Squish and Whitetip looking at a snarl of brambles. "I could climb over it, I suppose," Squish was saying. "Or we could go round the other side and see if we can get to it that way," Whitetip suggested. "What's up?" Brian asked as he approached. "There's a lovely load of acorns over there," Whitetip explained. "But those brambles are in the way." The two squirrels looked at each other. "Brian," Whitetip began in a way which you knew meant she was about to ask a favour. "Brian, do you think you could pull some of the brambles away so we can get through?" Brian looked at her and scowled. "Digging," he said. "You want me to dig?" "Well, just a bit," Squish said. "Well, that's all you think I'm good for, isn't it?" Brian snapped. "Digging." "Well, you are very good at it," Whitetip told him. "There's more to life than digging," Brian told her, sounding very cross now. "Brian, what's wrong?" Whitetip asked. "This isn't like you." "Yes, it is," Brian replied. "It is like me. Everyone thinks that all badgers can do is dig. Even the other badgers think that, but digging isn't like me. I'm fed up with digging. I want to do something else." There was a silence as the two squirrels regarded Brian. "Like what?" Squish asked. "I don't know," Brian said. "Something." There was another pause, then Whitetip hopped over to Brian and gently laid a paw on his snout. "I'll tell you what, Grumpy," she said. "Why don't we have a think?" The two squirrels and the young badger sat and thought. "What do you like doing?" Squish asked after a while. "I don't know," Brian replied. "I've never tried anything else." They thought for a bit longer. "What do you think you might like doing?" Whitetip wondered. "You know, when you're digging, do you ever sort of think, you know what, I'd rather be doing—" "Not really," Brian told her. "I just dig and move stuff." "I'm not sure this is getting us anywhere," Squish said. They thought a bit more, but there's only so much thinking you can do. "I want to have an adventure," Brian suddenly declared. "I'm not sure it works like that," Whitetip said. "I'm not sure you find adventures. I think they sort of find you." "Well, I'm going to find one," Brian said. "Do badgers have adventures?" Squish asked. "I've never heard of it." "That's the point," Brian said. "Badgers dig and don't have adventures. I could be the first." Brian was still thinking about this idea when he sat down to have tea with his parents. "Dad," he said, after his father had cleared away a large helping of worms, "have any badgers ever had any adventures?" "I don't know," his father replied. "Let me think. Well, there was that one time when Brock got his snout stuck in an ant's nest. That was pretty funny." "No, I mean a real adventure." "Then, no, not really." "Well, not unless you count Barrington the Mad, but he's, well, mad." This caught Brian's attention. "Who's Barrington the Mad?" he asked. "He's an old badger who used to live around here. He used to go on about how he had travelled to lands outside the woods and seen things no badger had seen." "What happened to him?" Brian asked. "He just wandered off one day," Earthface told him. "He said he couldn't stay round here, not with all the other things he'd seen. It was all too grey round here," he said. "No one's seen him since." Brian was really interested now. A badger who had seen other things. "Anyway," his father said, "I wouldn't worry about him now. He's probably gone down the deepest tunnel by now." He was really old even then and quite mad. Earthface chuckled to himself. "That's right, I remember now. There was the other thing old Barrington used to say. He reckoned that he could see colours. Can you imagine it? Completely mad. As Brian trailed behind his father and Roger back to the set at the end of that night's dig, his mind was full of what his father had told him. Somewhere there is a badger who can see in colour, he thought. I wonder where. Brian was so lost in thought that he had not been looking where he was going. If he had been watching his step, he might have missed meeting another badger who was going to change his life. Chapter 4, in which we and Brian meet Nell. Little did he know it, but Brian was not the only badger in the woods who wished for a different life. Not far from where Brian and his father were digging a new set was the entrance to a very old set. It was one which had been occupied by a large family of badgers for many generations. Passages stretched for a long distance under the ground, and large chambers had been dug out from the sides of most of those passages. Each chamber had been carefully filled with straw and grass, so that the badgers who lived in those chambers would have comfortable, warm bedding. The trouble was that this bedding got damp and dirty, so every day the badgers who lived in the set dragged the bedding back outside to dry in the sun, then dragged it all back in again. One of the badgers who had the job of dragging the bedding in and out was a young female named Nell. She lived in the set with her parents, 4 brothers and a large family of aunts, uncles and cousins. The family was so large that Nell didn't even know everyone's name. Some of the badgers she bumped into in the passages of the set could just as well have been complete strangers, even though, somewhere along the line, they were all related to her. The frequency with which Nell bumped into other badgers was part of Nell's problem. She bumped into a great many things, not just other badgers. Nell, like a lot of badgers, had very poor eyesight. While she was dragging bundles of bedding from the set, you could often hear the warning shouts of the other badgers. "Watch out for that bush, Nell! Nell, mind that stone!" Her brothers teased her about her eyesight all the time, even though their eyesight wasn't really that much better. They clearly felt they could tease her because they were older. They would often put things in her way and laugh when she tripped or knocked into them. They didn't care that sometimes knocking into branches or rocks actually hurt her. They laughed themselves silly anyway because it was the teasing rather than the bumps and scrapes which hurt Nell more than anything. But Nell did her best to ignore her brothers and get on with what she had to do. Drying the bedding was important work. After a long night's dig, her family needed comfy bedding to sleep in, and you couldn't get a good night's sleep if your bed smelt of damp badgers. On this particular morning, Nell was struggling backwards out of the entrance to the set with a large tangled mat of straw. She knew she wouldn't have long to pull the straw out of the set and spread it out to dry before her father and brothers came home from digging. By that time, they would all be expecting fresh bedding laid out in their chambers. It was partly because she was hurrying and partly because she couldn't see very well where she was going that Nell collided with something behind her and caused her to scatter the bedding everywhere. Nell looked round, but couldn't see what she'd bumped into. Suddenly she heard a voice. "Hey!" the voice shouted. It sounded angry. Nell squinted, but she couldn't see where the voice had come from. All she could see was a pile of straw that she'd dropped. Then, to her astonishment, the straw began to move. "Hey!" the pile of straw said again. Then, before Nell's eyes, the clump of straw shook violently and turned into a badger. "Thanks for burying me," Brian said. "I'm going to be tasting straw all day." "Oh, I'm sorry," Nell cried. "I didn't see you." "I was right there," Brian told her grumpily, but he shook himself again and more straw flew off. "But I was going backwards and I had all this straw and I don't see very well." Nell looked closely at Brian, moving a bit nearer to do so. "Hey, you're a badger," she said. "Do I know you?" "Yes, I'm a badger," Brian snapped. "Congratulations, you've recognised one of your own kind." "Well, there's no need for that," Nell said. "I told you I can't see very well. What's your name, Mr. Grumpy Badger?" "It's Brian," Brian replied. "Hello, Brian, I'm Nell." Brian didn't reply. He just scratched himself and removed some of the remnants of straw. "You're supposed to say, 'Hello, Nell,'" Nell told him. "Then you might even say, 'How are you?' as if you were feeling really polite." "I'm not feeling polite," Brian said. "Well, yes, I can see that. Why don't you try it anyway? Go on, it's easy. Just say after me, 'Hello, Nell.'" "Hello, Nell," Brian said reluctantly. "There," Nell announced triumphantly. "Shall we go for 'How are you?' or is that too much for one day?" "You know what," Brian said, smiling despite himself, "you're actually quite annoying." "No, I'm not. I'm endearing." "You're weird," Brian replied. "No," Nell said, "you're weird." Brian found himself walking along beside this strange young badger as she gathered up the straw and spread it into neat piles. "Do you want a hand with that?" he asked. "No, I'm fine," Nell replied. Brian felt oddly disappointed until Nell added, "But you can stay and keep me company." As he sat and watched her moving the straw around, Brian smiled to himself again. For once, he actually felt happy. What was it about this annoying, short-sighted, clumsy badger that made him want to stay? "Well, that's that," Nell said finally. "I'll have to go back for some more." Brian wanted to stay a bit longer, but he also realised that his mother would be expecting him back. "Yes, I'll have to go," he said, "but maybe we could meet up again? Tomorrow?" "I'd like that," Nell replied with a smile which lit up her face. "But don't be put off if I walk right past you. It's only because I can't see you, not because I don't want to see you." As Brian shuffled back to his family's sat, he realised, suddenly and surprisingly, that all the way back he was smiling too. Come back tomorrow for part 3. Thank you very much.